The man everyone ignored that morning would change Sophia Bennett's life forever. The downtown Chicago commuter train rattled along the tracks beneath a gray spring sky, its windows streaked with the remains of an early drizzle. The car was crowded with people heading to work, eyes fixed on phones, coffee cups balanced carefully in their hands, faces carrying the familiar exhaustion of another Monday. Sophia Bennett stood near the center of the train, one hand gripping a metal pole and the other holding a worn sketchbook pressed against her chest. At 30 years old, she had mastered the art of balancing too many responsibilities at once. 2 jobs, rent due in 9 days, an aging apartment she shared with her younger brother, Tyler, and a dream she refused to let die no matter how difficult life became. Around her, conversations blended into a steady hum. A businessman complained about traffic. A college student scrolled through social media. Someone laughed at a video playing through earbuds. Nobody noticed the man standing several feet away near the train doors. He wore a dark jacket, faded jeans, and a simple baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. There was nothing remarkable about him. Nothing that suggested he controlled a company worth billions of dollars. Nothing that revealed he was Alexander Reed, the CEO of Reed Global, one of the most influential corporations in America. For the past 3 weeks, Alexander had been traveling anonymously through cities across the country. No assistants, no security teams, no luxury cars, just observation. He wanted to see how ordinary people lived beyond boardrooms and quarterly reports. He wanted answers no executive briefing could provide. The train lurched slightly as it approached the next station. Sophia adjusted her grip on the pole and glanced down at her sketchbook. She had spent the ride drawing faces from memory, practicing expressions she hoped to use in future paintings. Art had always been her escape, the one place where bills, stress, and uncertainty couldn't reach her. Then she heard something hit the floor. The sound wasn't loud. Most passengers barely reacted. But Sophia looked up immediately. The man in the baseball cap had stumbled. His shoulder struck the wall beside the doors. For a brief second, he seemed to regain balance. Then his knees gave way. He collapsed onto the floor. Several people stepped backward. A woman gasped. Someone pulled out a phone. Another passenger frowned before looking away. The train continued moving. Sophia's heart jumped. Without hesitation, she pushed through the crowd. "Excuse me. Please move." Her voice carried a confidence she didn't always feel. She knelt beside the man. "Sir, can you hear me?" The stranger's eyes remained closed. His face looked pale beneath the fluorescent lights. Sophia quickly checked that he was breathing normally. Relief washed through her chest when she saw the steady rise and fall. "Can somebody call the conductor?" she asked. A few passengers exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, an older man nodded and moved toward the intercom. Sophia stayed beside the stranger. She removed her light cardigan and folded it beneath his head to make him more comfortable. "You're okay," she said softly, even though she wasn't sure he could hear her. "Help is coming." Minutes felt longer inside a crowded train. Most passengers watched from a distance. Some returned to their phones. Others whispered among themselves. Sophia remained where she was. She didn't think about being late for work. She didn't think about the warning her manager had already given her last week. She only saw another human being who needed help. Eventually, the train stopped at the next station. Transit staff arrived and carefully assisted the man onto a bench inside the terminal's medical office. Sophia followed. She could have left then. Most people would have. But something told her to stay. The small room smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. A nurse performed a quick evaluation while Sophia waited nearby. She checked the clock twice and knew every passing minute increased the chances of arriving late to her shift. Yet she couldn't bring herself to walk away. Nearly 20 minutes later, the stranger stirred. His eyelids fluttered open. Confusion crossed his face. Then his gaze landed on Sophia. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Alexander looked at the woman sitting across from him. Her brown hair was pulled into a loose ponytail. Her clothes were simple. A sketchbook rested on her lap. Concern still lingered in her eyes. Genuine concern. Not curiosity. Not expectation. Just kindness. The kind he rarely encountered anymore. "You're awake," Sophia said with a relieved smile. "You gave everyone quite a scare." Alexander blinked slowly. "What happened?" His voice sounded rough. "You fainted on the train." She reached into her bag and handed him a bottle of water she had purchased from a nearby vending machine. You should probably take it easy for a minute. Alexander accepted the bottle and stared at it. Then he looked back at her. Most people recognize power. Most people wanted something. But this woman didn't even know who he was. And somehow that made this moment feel more important than any business meeting he had attended all year. Sophia glanced at the station clock again. Her stomach tightened. She was definitely going to be late now. Yet when she looked at the stranger sitting across from her, she found herself smiling anyway. She had no idea that the man she had just helped was one of the richest CEOs in America. And neither of them knew that this ordinary Monday morning was only the beginning of a story neither would ever forget. Sophia practically ran the final 2 blocks to the coffee shop where she worked mornings, the cold Chicago wind pushing against her as she checked the time on her phone. 28 minutes late. Her stomach sank. The little bell above the cafe door chimed as she stepped inside, and she immediately spotted her manager behind the counter. Mr. Hansen looked up from the register and frowned. Late again, Sophia. She opened her mouth to explain, but stopped herself. There was no point. People rarely cared about explanations when schedules were involved. I am sorry, she said quietly. There was a medical situation on the train. Mr. Hansen sighed and shook his head. I know you always mean well, but meaning well does not pay the bills around here. The words stung because they were true. The cafe survived on tight margins. Every employee mattered. Sophia nodded and tied on her apron. It will not happen again. But even as she said it, she knew she would make the same choice if faced with the situation again. The morning rushed past quickly. Orders piled up. Coffee machines hissed. Customers came and went. Sophia worked without complaint, carrying trays, cleaning tables, and forcing a smile whenever someone approached the counter. Yet her thoughts kept drifting back to the stranger from the train. She wondered whether he had gotten home safely. She wondered whether he had family checking on him. Mostly she wondered why his tired eyes lingered in her memory. By the time her shift ended, her feet ached and her shoulders felt heavy. She stepped outside and walked toward the apartment she shared with her younger brother. The building was old, the elevator unreliable, and the hallway lights flickered more often than they worked. Still, it was home. When she opened the door, the smell of instant noodles greeted her. Tyler sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by college textbooks. Long day, he asked. Sophia laughed softly. It is only halfway over. Tyler studied her expression. Something happened. She poured herself a glass of water and sat across from him. Then she told him about the train, the collapse, the station office, the stranger she had stayed behind to help. Tyler listened carefully before shaking his head with a smile. You are impossible. What does that mean? It means most people would have kept walking. Sophia shrugged. Most people are probably smarter than me. No, Tyler said. Most people are just scared of being inconvenienced. His words lingered long after the conversation ended. Later that evening, Sophia changed clothes and headed to her second job at a neighborhood art supply store. The extra income barely covered necessities, but every paycheck helped. During a quiet hour before closing, she pulled out her sketchbook from beneath the counter. Her pencil moved instinctively across the page. Within minutes, the stranger's face began to appear. The curve of his jaw, the tired eyes, the thoughtful expression he wore after waking up. She paused and stared at the drawing. It felt strange. She rarely sketched people she met only once. Yet something about him seemed unfinished, as though their brief encounter had left a question hanging in the air. Meanwhile, several miles away, Alexander Reed sat alone inside a modest hotel room. No penthouse suite. No executive floor. Just a standard room overlooking a busy intersection. The bottle of water Sophia had given him sat on the desk beside his notebook. He had intended to throw it away hours ago. Instead, he found himself staring at it. During the past 3 weeks of traveling anonymously, he had met hundreds of people. Employees, drivers, cashiers, servers. Most interactions lasted seconds. Few stayed with him. Yet he could not stop thinking about the woman who had sacrificed her time to help a complete stranger. She had expected nothing, asked for nothing. She had not even told him her last name. Alexander opened his notebook and wrote a single sentence. What makes someone choose kindness when life is already difficult? He looked at the words for a long moment. Then he remembered something else. The sketchbook. He had noticed it immediately. The careful way she carried it. The smudge of pencil on her fingertips. The quiet excitement in her eyes whenever she glanced at its pages. For reasons he could not fully explain, he wanted to know more. Outside, City lights reflected against the window. Cars moved through the streets below. Somewhere across Chicago, Sophia was likely finishing another exhausting day, unaware that the stranger she had helped was searching for answers of his own. Neither of them knew it yet, but their paths were already beginning to move toward each other once again. Sophia's week continued exactly the way most of her weeks did. Early mornings, long shifts, careful budgeting, late nights spent helping Tyler review assignments while pretending she was not worried about money. Yet every now and then, her eyes drifted toward the sketchbook resting on the corner of her small desk. The drawing of the stranger remained there, unfinished. She told herself she was simply practicing portrait work, nothing more. But each time she opened the page, she found herself adding another detail. A shadow beneath the eyes, a slight smile, the thoughtful expression he had worn in the station office. By Friday evening, rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. Tyler had fallen asleep over a textbook, and Sophia sat quietly at the kitchen table with her sketchbook open. The city beyond the glass shimmered with reflections from traffic lights and storefront signs. She sharpened her pencil and returned to the portrait. This time she added the station bench where he had been sitting. Then she surprised herself by sketching a second figure nearby. Her own outline. Small, barely noticeable. She stared at the image for several seconds before shaking her head and laughing softly. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. Meanwhile, Alexander sat inside a conference room on the 39th floor of Reed Global Headquarters. Executives presented quarterly projections on giant screens. Charts filled the walls. Millions of dollars were being discussed. Yet his attention drifted elsewhere. "Alexander," one board member asked, "what are your thoughts?" He blinked and returned to the conversation. The room waited. Normally, he could analyze a financial report within seconds. Today, he found himself thinking about a woman carrying a sketchbook on a commuter train. After the meeting ended, his assistant Claire followed him into his office. "You have been distracted all week," she said carefully. Alexander loosened his tie. "Have I? You canceled 2 dinners, postponed a media interview, and spent 20 minutes staring out a window this morning." He smiled slightly. "That obvious?" Claire folded her arms. "What happened during your field trip?" Alexander walked toward the glass wall overlooking Chicago's skyline. "I met someone." Claire raised an eyebrow immediately. "Someone interesting? Someone kind?" The answer surprised even him. Later that night, Alexander opened the notebook he had carried throughout his undercover journey. He flipped through pages filled with observations from different cities. Conversations. Notes. Impressions. Then he stopped on the page where he had written a question days earlier. What makes someone choose kindness when life is already difficult? For the first time, he thought he might know the answer. Some people simply refused to let hardship change who they were. The realization stayed with him. The next morning, he asked a private investigator to locate the woman from the train. Not because he intended to reveal himself. Not yet. He simply wanted to know whether she was real beyond that brief encounter. By Monday afternoon, a file sat on his desk. Sophia Bennett, 30 years old. Part-time barista. Part-time employee at an art supply store. Lives with younger brother. No criminal record. No unusual history. Just an ordinary life filled with extraordinary effort. Alexander studied the information quietly. Then he noticed something else. Attached to the report was a photograph taken from public social media. Sophia stood beside a small display of paintings at a local community art fair. She was smiling. Truly smiling. The kind of smile people wore when they forgot the world was watching. Alexander found himself smiling too. Across town, Sophia's shift at the art supply store was nearly over. The evening crowd had faded, leaving only a few customers browsing paintbrushes and sketch pads. She was organizing shelves when an older customer approached carrying a stack of supplies. "Big project?" Sophia asked while ringing up the purchase. "Community art class," the woman replied. "We teach adults who never had the chance to learn." Sophia's eyes brightened immediately. "That sounds wonderful." The woman nodded. "It is. Art changes people." After the customer left, Sophia remained thoughtful. Art changes people. The words echoed in her mind. She glanced toward her sketchbook beneath the counter. Maybe that was why she kept drawing. Not because life was easy, but because creativity reminded her that hope could still exist in difficult seasons. Minutes before closing, the front door opened again. The bell chimed softly overhead. Sophia looked up automatically. A tall man stepped inside wearing a simple jacket and jeans. A baseball cap rested low over familiar eyes. For a second, she thought she was imagining things. Then the man smiled. The same calm smile she remembered from the station office. Alexander Reed stood a few feet away, though she still knew him only as the stranger from the train. "Hi," he said. "I was hoping I might find you." Sophia froze, her hand resting on the counter. Of all the people she expected to see that evening, he was the last one. And somehow, without understanding why, her heart began to beat just a little faster. Sophia stared at him for a moment, trying to decide whether she was surprised, confused, or simply curious. Alexander seemed slightly uncomfortable standing there, as if showing up had required more courage than he expected. "You found me," she finally said. A small smile appeared on his face. "I did. That is not exactly easy to do in a city this size. I got lucky." The answer came quickly, and Sophia noticed it sounded rehearsed. Before she could question it further, a customer approached the register. She excused herself and finished the transaction while Alexander wandered through the aisles, examining sketchbooks, paint sets, and brushes. When the customer left, the store fell quiet again. "So," Sophia said, crossing her arms lightly, "what brings you here?" Alexander held up a sketch pad from a display shelf. "Maybe I decided to become an artist." She laughed. "I do not think that is the real reason." He looked down briefly before meeting her eyes again. "I wanted to thank you properly." The sincerity in his voice surprised her. Most people would have forgotten the encounter by now. "You already thanked me at the station." It did not feel like enough. For a moment, neither spoke. The soft music playing through the store speakers filled the silence. Then Sophia glanced at the clock. Closing time was only 15 minutes away. "Well, if gratitude is your mission, I accept." Alexander smiled. "That is it. That is it. You are making this very easy. Life is hard enough. Not everything needs to be complicated." The word stayed with him. A few minutes later, Sophia locked the front door and switched the sign to closed. She turned around to find Alexander still standing there. "You know," he said, "most people would have asked for something by now." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Such as free dinner, money, a favor." She laughed again. "You think very highly of yourself." Alexander found himself laughing too. It felt surprisingly natural. Fair point. Outside, the evening air carried the scent of rain. Streetlights reflected on wet pavement as they walked together toward the train station. For the first few blocks, conversation came easily. Sophia talked about the neighborhood. Alexander asked questions. Real questions. Not the kind people asked simply to be polite. He wanted details. He wanted stories. He wanted to understand her world. "You work 2 jobs?" he asked. Sophia nodded. "Most weeks." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." She shrugged. "But Tyler graduates next year. Once he finishes college, things should get easier." "You are helping pay for his education?" "Part of it." Alexander glanced at her. She said it casually, as if sacrificing personal comfort for family was the most normal thing in the world. The realization impressed him more than any business achievement he had heard discussed in boardrooms. They reached the station entrance. Commuters moved around them in every direction. Sophia adjusted the strap of her bag. "This is my stop." Alexander hesitated. For the first time in years, he found himself not wanting a conversation to end. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia nodded. "Why did you stay?" She looked confused. "Stay where?" "At the station. Most people left." The question seemed to catch her off guard. She thought about it for several seconds before answering. "Because if I were the one who needed help, I would hope somebody stayed for me." Alexander lowered his gaze briefly. Such a simple answer. Yet it carried more truth than many speeches he had heard from executives claiming to care about people. Sophia smiled. "Besides, my grandmother always said character is what you do when nobody is keeping score." The train announcement echoed through the station overhead. Sophia stepped toward the platform entrance. "Good luck with your art career," she teased, nodding toward the sketch pad he had purchased. "I have a feeling I will be terrible at it." "Probably." She laughed and disappeared into the crowd. Alexander remained where he was long after she was gone. Back at his hotel that evening, he opened the blank sketch pad and stared at the first page. He had no artistic talent whatsoever. Yet instead of closing it, he picked up a pencil and attempted a drawing. 10 minutes later, the result looked terrible. He laughed at himself. Then he noticed something unexpected. For the first time in months, maybe years. He was smiling alone in a room with no audience, no cameras, and no expectations. Across the city, Sophia sat at her kitchen table reviewing bills while Tyler worked on an assignment nearby. Her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. She frowned and opened it. "Thank you again for helping a stranger." Sophia stared at the screen. A second message appeared moments later. "Also, you were right. I am terrible at drawing." Without realizing it, she smiled. Then she typed a reply. "That makes two of us. Because the portrait in my sketchbook is still unfinished." Sophia stared at the message for several seconds before shaking her head in disbelief. Somehow, this stranger had managed to insert himself into her daily routine without warning. Over the next few days, their conversations remained simple. No dramatic confessions. No endless texting. Just brief messages scattered between responsibilities. Yet those messages became something she quietly looked forward to. On Tuesday morning, Alexander sent a photograph of a badly drawn coffee cup. The proportions were completely wrong. The handle looked impossible. Sophia laughed so hard she nearly spilled espresso while opening the cafe. Her reply arrived seconds later. "That coffee cup looks like it needs medical attention." A minute passed before his answer appeared. "Then it is lucky I know someone who helps strangers." The exchange stayed with her all day. Meanwhile, Alexander found himself checking his phone more often than he cared to admit. During meetings, he caught himself wondering what Sophia was doing. During business dinners, he found expensive restaurants less interesting than conversations about sketchbooks and neighborhood art fairs. It made no logical sense, yet the feeling persisted. One Saturday afternoon, Sophia received another message. "Have you ever visited Lakeside Park on the north side?" She looked at the screen curiously. A few moments later, another message arrived. "There is an outdoor art market there today. I thought you might like it." Sophia hesitated. Her first instinct was to say no. She had work, bills, responsibilities. But something inside her wanted to go. Maybe because she rarely allowed herself simple experiences anymore. Maybe because she was curious about the man behind the messages. Or maybe because she was beginning to enjoy his company more than she intended. 2 hours later, she stepped through the entrance of the park, carrying her sketchbook. Families wandered between vendor booths. Musicians played near the lake. Children chased bubbles floating through the afternoon sunlight. The atmosphere felt warm and alive. Then she spotted Alexander standing beside a row of paintings. He wore the same casual style she had always seen him in. Nothing about him suggested wealth or influence. To Sophia, he was simply Alexander, the mysterious stranger who seemed oddly interested in art despite having no talent for drawing. "You actually came," he said. "You sound surprised." "A little." "Why?" "Because you seem busy." Sophia laughed. "You have no idea how funny that sounds." For the next several hours, they wandered through the market together. They examined paintings, discussed photography, shared stories. For the first time, Sophia noticed how carefully Alexander listened. Most people waited for their turn to speak. Alexander genuinely paid attention. When she described her dream of someday opening a small community art space, he asked questions, detailed questions, not because he was being polite, but because he wanted to understand. "What would it look like?" he asked as they walked beside the lake. Sophia's eyes brightened immediately. A place where anyone could create regardless of money. Free classes, shared supplies, workshops. She smiled while imagining it. "Some people think art is a luxury. I think it helps people survive difficult seasons." Alexander looked at her thoughtfully. "I think you are probably right." As the afternoon continued, Sophia found herself relaxing in ways she had not expected. For a few hours, she forgot about overdue bills and double shifts. She forgot about stress. She simply enjoyed being present. Later, they sat on a bench overlooking the water. The skyline shimmered in the distance. Boats moved slowly across the lake. Sophia opened her sketchbook and began drawing the view. Alexander watched quietly. Her pencil moved with confidence and purpose. Within minutes, shapes emerged from blank paper. "You make it look easy," he said. "It is not easy." "Then why does it look that way?" Sophia smiled without looking up. "Because I love it." The answer struck him more deeply than she realized. He spent most of his life around people chasing success. Yet sitting beside her, he was reminded that fulfillment and success were not always the same thing. When she finally finished, she turned the sketchbook toward him. The drawing captured the lake, the skyline, and the afternoon light beautifully. Then Alexander noticed something else. Near the corner of the page, almost hidden among the details, She had sketched a small figure sitting on the bench beside the artist. Him. Sophia noticed his expression immediately. "Do not get emotional," she teased. "It is only a sketch." Alexander smiled. But as he looked at the drawing, he realized it was the first time in years someone had seen him not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, not as a public figure, but simply as another person sharing a quiet afternoon by the water. And without either of them realizing it, the distance between their two very different worlds was becoming smaller with every conversation. The following week arrived faster than either of them expected. Sophia and Alexander continued exchanging messages, sharing small moments from their days. Yet there were also moments when Alexander seemed distracted. He occasionally disappeared for hours without explanation. Sometimes entire evenings passed before he responded. Sophia noticed the pattern but chose not to mention it. Everyone had responsibilities. Everyone carried private burdens. On Thursday afternoon, Sophia's manager at the cafe approached her with an unusual request. "One of our corporate clients needs extra staff for a charity gala tomorrow night," Mr. Hansen explained. "The pay is double your normal shift." Sophia immediately looked up. Double pay was impossible to ignore. Rent was due soon, and every extra dollar mattered. "I will do it," she said without hesitation. The next evening, she stood inside one of the most luxurious hotels she had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings nearly 30 feet high. Elegant floral arrangements decorated every corner. Men in tailored suits and women in formal gowns filled the ballroom. Sophia adjusted her server uniform and tried not to stare. The entire event felt like a different universe from her everyday life. Throughout the evening, she carried trays, refilled glasses, and navigated crowded conversations. Everywhere she turned, people discussed investments, acquisitions, and companies she had never heard of. More than once she caught herself wondering what Alexander would think of a place like this. The thought made her smile. He would probably make a joke about the expensive decorations. Around 8 o'clock, a sudden wave of excitement swept through the room. Conversations began fading. Guests slowly turned toward the massive stage positioned at the front of the ballroom. Sophia noticed executives straightening their jackets. Others moved closer to get a better view. A large screen illuminated behind the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, his voice echoing through the ballroom. "Thank you for joining us tonight. We are honored to welcome a leader whose vision has transformed industries across the globe." Applause filled the room. Sophia continued arranging glasses on a nearby table. She barely paid attention at first. Then the giant screen changed. A photograph appeared. Sophia froze instantly. Her heart skipped a beat. The image showed a man smiling confidently during a business interview. A man she knew. A man she had spent weeks talking to. A man she believed was an ordinary traveler. The caption beneath the photograph read, "Alexander Reed, Chairman and CEO of Reed Global." For a second, Sophia thought she was misreading the screen. Her eyes moved back and forth across the words. The ballroom erupted into louder applause. Then the host spoke again. "Please welcome one of the most respected business leaders in America, Mr. Alexander Reed." Sophia slowly turned toward the stage. The room seemed to blur around her. Every sound became distant. Every movement slowed. And then she saw him. Alexander stepped into the spotlight wearing a perfectly tailored black suit. The audience immediately rose to its feet. Hundreds of people stood in admiration. Executives smiled. Investors applauded. Reporters lifted cameras. He looked completely different from the man who wandered art fairs and sent photographs of terrible sketches. Yet he was unquestionably the same person. Sophia felt the air leave her lungs. Memories crashed together inside her mind. The train station. The messages. The afternoons by the lake. The conversations about dreams and family. Suddenly, every missing piece connected. Every unexplained absence. Every vague answer. Every strange coincidence. Alexander had never been a struggling freelancer. He had never been an ordinary traveler. He was one of the wealthiest and most powerful executives in the country. On stage, Alexander began speaking about leadership, opportunity, and community investment. The audience listened attentively. But Sophia barely heard a word. Her pulse pounded in her ears. A painful question repeated itself again and again. Why did he lie? Across the ballroom, Alexander continued his speech with practiced confidence. Then his eyes moved across the crowd. For a brief moment, they landed on Sophia. Everything changed instantly. His expression faltered, just slightly. barely noticeable to anyone else. But Sophia saw it. She saw recognition. She saw surprise. And perhaps worst of all, she saw guilt. Neither of them looked away. The distance between them was only 50 feet, yet it suddenly felt impossible to cross. For the first time since they met, Sophia realized she had never truly known the man standing in front of her. And for the first time since beginning his undercover journey, Alexander understood that the secret he had protected for weeks was about to cost him the one connection he never expected to find. Sophia did not wait for the speech to end. The moment her shift supervisor turned away, she quietly placed her serving tray on a nearby table and headed toward the ballroom exit. The applause behind her sounded distant now, swallowed by the storm of emotions filling her chest. By the time she reached the hotel lobby, her hands were trembling. She pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into the cool Chicago night air. Cars moved past in streams of white and red lights. People laughed outside restaurants. The city continued as if nothing had happened. But everything felt different. She had trusted him, not because of money or status, because she believed he was honest. Her phone vibrated inside her pocket. She already knew who it was before looking. Alexander. She stared at the screen as it rang. Then she pressed decline. Seconds later, another call appeared. She declined again. A text message followed. Sophia, please let me explain. She did not answer. Another message arrived. I never wanted to hurt you. Her eyes filled with frustration. Hurt me? She thought. You never even gave me the chance to know who you really were. She slipped the phone into her purse and started walking. Several blocks away, Alexander exited through a private hotel entrance moments after ending his speech early. Reporters had questions. Executives wanted conversations. Investors wanted photographs. He ignored all of them. The only thing that mattered was finding Sophia before she disappeared completely from his life. He spotted her across the street just as a traffic light changed. Sophia, he called. She stopped walking but did not turn around immediately. When she finally faced him, the disappointment in her eyes hit harder than any criticism he had ever received. Alexander crossed the street carefully and stopped several feet away. Please, he said quietly. Just give me 5 minutes. Sophia laughed once, though there was no humor in it. 5 minutes. That is all I am asking. You had weeks, Alexander. Hearing his real name spoken differently unsettled him. The warmth was gone. I know. Do you? She asked. Because I am not sure you understand why this matters. People passed around them without noticing. The city remained busy while their world stood still. I was going to tell you, Alexander said. Sophia shook her head immediately. When? He had no answer. That silence said more than words could. Exactly, she replied. You were never going to tell me. That is not true. Then why did I have to find out from a giant screen in a ballroom? The question landed heavily between them. Alexander looked away briefly. For the first time in years, he could not think of the right thing to say. I liked being around you, he admitted. You treated me differently than everyone else. Sophia folded her arms. Because I thought you were being honest with me. I was honest about who I am as a person. No, she said softly. You showed me the version of yourself that was convenient. The words hurt because they carried truth. Sophia reached into her bag and pulled out her sketchbook. Alexander immediately recognized it. The same worn cover. The same pages she carried everywhere. She opened it carefully and turned to the portrait she had drawn weeks earlier. The portrait of him. Then she looked at it for a long moment before closing the book again. You know what is funny? She said. I kept trying to finish this drawing. Alexander remained silent. Every time I sat down with a pencil, something felt missing. Now I know why. He swallowed hard. Sophia, the person I was drawing did not actually exist. The disappointment in her voice was far worse than anger would have been. For several seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Sophia stepped backward. I need time. Can we talk tomorrow? Alexander asked. I do not know. Next week. She looked away toward the city lights. I honestly do not know. Then she turned and walked away. This time he did not follow. He simply stood there watching until she disappeared into the crowd. Hours later, Sophia sat alone at her kitchen table. Tyler had already gone to sleep. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. She opened her sketchbook again and stared at the unfinished portrait. Part of her missed the man she thought she knew. Another part wondered whether any of it had been real. Across the city, Alexander sat alone inside his penthouse for the first time in weeks. The luxury around him suddenly felt empty. Expensive furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, a breathtaking skyline view. None of it mattered. His phone remained silent on the table. No messages from Sophia. No new replies. Just silence. And for the first time since meeting her on that train, Alexander Reed realized that losing her was a possibility he had never prepared himself to face. 3 weeks passed without a single conversation between them. Sophia buried herself in work, convincing herself that distance was the right choice. She focused on early shifts at the cafe, long evenings at the art supply store, and helping Tyler prepare for graduation. On the surface, life looked normal. Yet every time her phone buzzed, a small part of her wondered if it was Alexander. It never was. Meanwhile, Alexander respected the space she had asked for, even though every instinct told him to call. He threw himself into work, attended meetings, approved projects, and gave interviews. But nothing felt quite right. One evening, Claire entered his office carrying a folder. "You have been staring at that skyline for 10 minutes, she said. Alexander smiled faintly. "Only 10. She placed the folder on his desk. "You can build companies. You can solve business problems. But some things require honesty, not strategy." After she left, Alexander opened the folder. Inside were photographs from a community art fair Sophia had participated in years earlier. Small paintings, sketches, smiling visitors. He studied every image carefully. Then an idea began to form. Not a grand gesture designed to impress. Something meaningful. Something connected to who Sophia truly was. Over the next several weeks, plans quietly took shape. Across the city, Sophia arrived at the art supply store one Thursday afternoon expecting an ordinary shift. Instead, her manager approached holding a sealed envelope. "This was delivered for you." Sophia frowned. "For me?" "Apparently." The envelope contained a formal invitation printed on thick cream-colored paper. She read it twice to make sure she understood correctly. "You are cordially invited to the opening night of a special art exhibition." Through Sophia's eyes, her confusion deepened immediately. She had never heard of the exhibition. She certainly had never organized one. Yet her name appeared in large, elegant lettering at the top. The event would take place Saturday evening at one of Chicago's most respected galleries. Tyler nearly dropped the invitation when she showed him later that night. "You have to go. I do not even know what this is." "That is exactly why you have to go." Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm spring air. Sophia stood outside the gallery entrance feeling completely out of place. Guests entered wearing elegant clothing while she questioned whether she should have come at all. Finally, she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, she stopped walking. The first painting hanging on the wall looked familiar. Very familiar. Sophia moved closer. Her eyes widened. It was based on one of her sketches. Not copied exactly, but inspired by it. Across the room hung another piece. Then another. Then another. Every artwork traced back to ideas she had drawn in notebooks over the years. City parks, train stations, neighborhood streets, moments of kindness, ordinary people. A lifetime of observations transformed into a stunning exhibition. Visitors moved through the gallery admiring each piece. Some discussed technique. Others talked about emotion. Sophia could barely process what she was seeing. Then she noticed a small plaque mounted beside the central display. The words were simple, inspired by an artist who sees beauty where others see ordinary things. Her vision deserved to be seen. Sophia's throat tightened. She already knew who had done this. A few moments later, she found him standing quietly near the back of the gallery. No spotlight, no audience, no security team, just Alexander. He looked nervous for perhaps the first time since she had met him. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, Sophia glanced around the room. "You did all this?" Alexander nodded. "I asked local artists to create pieces inspired by your sketches and ideas." "Why?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because you spent weeks showing me how much art matters to people." Sophia looked at the exhibition again. The room was filled with strangers connecting through creativity, through hope, through stories, through ideas she had once believed nobody noticed. "This is too much," she whispered. "No," Alexander said softly. "It is not enough." She turned toward him. "Alexander, I know I hurt you." His voice remained steady. "And I know I cannot change the way you found out the truth. But everything else was real. Every conversation, every laugh, every afternoon by the lake. I was not pretending to care about those things." For a long moment, Sophia simply looked at him. Then her eyes drifted toward a framed sketch displayed near the center of the gallery. It was her unfinished portrait of him from weeks earlier. Somehow he had found a copy among the pages she once showed him. Beneath the sketch was a small handwritten note. Some stories deserve to be finished honestly. Standing there surrounded by art, memories, and the truth he should have shared from the beginning. Sophia felt the walls around her heart begin to crack just enough to let a little light back in. Sophia stood silently beside the framed sketch while the gallery continued buzzing around them. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to look at Alexander without the anger that had clouded every memory. What she saw was not the confident executive from the ballroom stage. It was the same man who had sat beside her at the lake, laughed at his terrible drawings, and listened when she talked about dreams most people considered unrealistic. "You really did all this for me?" she asked quietly. Alexander nodded. "Not because I wanted forgiveness. Because I wanted you to know that I believed in your dream, even when you thought nobody else did." Sophia looked around the room once more. Visitors stopped in front of paintings inspired by ordinary moments she had sketched over the years. People smiled. Some became emotional. Others shared stories of their own. For so long she had assumed her art mattered only to her. Tonight proved otherwise. "I was angry," she admitted. "You had every right to be. I felt foolish. You were never foolish." Alexander took a slow breath. "The foolish one was me. I spent years surrounded by people who knew my title before they knew me. Then I met someone who treated me like a normal person, and instead of trusting that connection, I hid behind a secret." The honesty in his voice made it impossible to doubt him. Sophia lowered her eyes briefly. "Everything became complicated after the gala. I know. And part of me kept wondering whether any of it was real." Alexander stepped closer, his expression sincere. "Sophia, the only thing that was not real was the name of my job. Everything else was." Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Sophia smiled for the first time. It was small, cautious, but genuine. Relief flashed across Alexander's face immediately. Months passed after that evening, and slowly their relationship found its way back. This time there were no secrets. Alexander introduced her to parts of his world he had hidden before. Boardrooms, corporate events, charity projects. Sophia introduced him to community art programs, neighborhood workshops, and the people who inspired her creativity. They learned how different their lives truly were, but they also discovered something more important. Their values were remarkably similar. Both believed in kindness. Both believed success meant little without purpose. Both believed people deserved opportunities regardless of their circumstances. 1 year later, on a warm spring afternoon, Sophia stood outside a renovated brick building on Chicago's north side. A crowd had gathered along the sidewalk. Local artists, students, families, and community leaders filled the street. A ribbon stretched across the entrance. Above the doors hung a sign that brought tears to Sophia's eyes. "Bennett Community Art Center." She turned toward Alexander in disbelief. "You named it after me." He smiled. "Actually, the board insisted." "There is a board?" "Apparently community art centers have those." Sophia laughed through her tears. The center represented everything she had once dreamed about. Free classes, shared studio space, scholarships, mentorship programs. A place where creativity would be available to anyone who walked through the doors. The dream she had described beside the lake was finally real. Later that evening, after the celebration ended and the guests departed, Sophia wandered through the quiet building. Paintings lined the walls. Sunlight faded beyond the windows. She entered the main studio and stopped. Alexander stood waiting near an easel positioned in the center of the room. On the easel rested her old sketchbook. The same worn sketchbook she had carried onto a train more than a year ago. "You kept it?" she asked softly. "You left it in my office after the planning meeting last month." He picked it up carefully and opened to the final page. The page was blank. Sophia immediately recognized it. Years ago, she had intentionally left that page empty, promising herself she would save it for something important. Alexander handed her a pencil. "Your story has filled every page except one." Sophia felt her heart begin to race. He reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small velvet box. "I think the last page deserves a happy ending." Tears filled her eyes before he even opened it. Inside rested a simple, elegant ring. Nothing extravagant. Nothing designed to impress. Just something beautiful and sincere. Alexander looked at her with the same honesty she had seen at the gallery months earlier. Sophia Bennett, you changed my life the day you chose to help a stranger when nobody else stopped. You reminded me who I wanted to be. You showed me that kindness matters. You showed me what home feels like. Will you marry me? Sophia laughed and cried at the same time. Then she nodded. Yes. The answer came instantly. Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger as sunlight streamed through the studio windows. Later, before leaving, Sophia opened her sketchbook one final time. On the last blank page, she drew two figures standing side by side beneath the words she wrote carefully across the bottom. The best stories begin with kindness.